This is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club, and it's on the German hyperinflation from 1920 to 1923, and it is philatelic evidence of an economic disaster. Now, for comparative purposes, so we can understand how the prices of stamps changed, in Manitoba in 1920, a teacher had an annual salary of $466. So let's call that $500. Average house price around $2,000. So assuming your maximum mortgage is 75% of that, $1,500. And given those numbers, I think maybe if you had retirement savings of $10,000, you might think that was a good amount of money. From a stamp point of view in Canada, these are the stamps that were issued between 1911 and 1925. King George V, the letter 1 or 2 cents to mail. And the values go up to 10 cents, but you can see the 10-cent value has been canceled with a grease pen, so it was obviously used on a parcel. By 1954 in Canada, here's Queen Elizabeth. The letters are 5 to 6 cents in 1954 in Canada. Now, inflation in Canada between 1915 and 1920, it was a high of 18% in 1917, a war year. But there was 12% deflation in 1921 and 22, and deflation in the 30s. 1946, also effectively a war year, 14%. But between 1920 and 2020, that's 100 years, the average inflation in Canada was 2.5%. In 1923 in Germany, it was 29,500% monthly. So historically, almost always, hyperinflation pays for war. So another reason not to like war. Here are the United States stamps from 1920, the Pilgrim Tercentenary. The rate in the States to mail a letter was 2 cents from 1911 to 1932. And from 1932 to 58, it was 3 cents. Great Britain, here's George V again. 1 or 2 cents to mail a letter, values all the way up to a shilling. Now, the causes of the German hyperinflation were, in particular, paying for the First World War. And in 1914, it was 4 marks to the US dollar. And Germany did not raise taxes to pay for the war. Canada did, France did, and for stamp collectors, they issued semi-postal stamps, caisse d'amortissement, to help pay for the war. And actually, it was very successful, using semi-postal stamps to help pay for the war. The Treaty of Versailles, which formally ended the First World War in 1919, at that time, it was 32 marks to the US dollar, so it had gone up or down by 8 times. Germany was forced to pay reparations of 50 billion marks, which I think at the time we probably should have realized wasn't going to work, but that was what they were forced to do, and the plan had to be changed 2 or 3 times after the hyperinflation because it proved it didn't work. But the reparations began in 1921. By 1922, it was 320 marks to the US dollar, so that's 10 times. 3 marks is now worth a penny. To deal with this, they printed money, and the whole thing ended in 1923. Now, what we tell ourselves about stamp collecting is this will help us learn a little bit of history. We'll learn a little bit about the country we're collecting. Maybe we'll learn a little bit of the language because we'll need to understand the words we see on stamps. And I had made a previous presentation on this, and I had more of these hyperinflation stamps than I had used tucked away in a couple of envelopes. And I always kind of decided I should do this again. And so in this presentation, I have some representative stamps before March of 1923, which is when the hyperinflation really got going. And after that, I've got them all shown, so you'll see them all. Now, a couple of years ago, I've had this in mind for a while, I bought a Michel catalog, a used 2007 catalog at a club auction. And I figured this would have all the details of the hyperinflation which I would need. But, of course, I would have to learn to speak a bit of German. And there are a couple of folks at the club who speak German. They said, oh, don't worry, John, you'll have no problem. You'll be able to figure it out. And I tried and failed a couple of times. German capitalizes all nouns. English just capitalizes proper nouns. French doesn't capitalize much at all. Germans are actually quite organized, and the Germanic countries have all agreed on the proper specific procedure for capitalizing nouns, so they're very organized. Months is one of the things I'm going to need to figure out, and they're the same. English, French, Latin, German, they're effectively the same. Spelt a little different. December in German is spelt with a Z, not a C, so okay, got the months figured out. Numbers, of course, are the same. Colors are where I hit a stopping point a couple or three times. One of the things that I had learned in school when I was taking Latin and French was that Italian and French and Spanish were Romance languages based on Latin, and that English was too. And of course, there are a lot of English words that come from French or Latin, but there are also a bunch of English words that aren't either French or Latin. Yacht, for instance, which is a German word. And as I was researching this, I found that English is considered by some people to be a Germanic language, not a Romance language. So I went, So as I said, colors were where I had some trouble. So here's a color. I had no idea what that meant. And so I decided I would type it into Google Translate. And as I got to the end, I went brown. Well, that's brown, right? And then working backwards, olive, well, olive brown. And dunkel, I'm guessing light is licht, and dunkel is dark. And I looked that up, and yeah, dunkel is dark. So dunkel olive brown, forgive my pronunciation if it's no good, is dark olive brown. So then I was able to look at some of the other colors, dunkelgrau ultramarine bis dunkelviolet ultramarine, and I went, okay, dark gray ultramarine going to dark violet ultramarine. And other than the fact that violet is actually purple, I was pretty darn close. So at that point, I was able to crack the code and speak enough German and learn a little bit more to be able to figure out my catalog and to be able to get more details to help me with this presentation. The other thing I thought about this time were the problems faced by both the post office and the public, other than just the inflation, which was astronomical. But this is an era of trains and telegraphs. There's no internet, there's no email, there's no cell phones. There are telephones, but not that many. You're probably still got horses and wagons picking stuff up at the train station and delivering stuff. Cars and trucks, even at the beginning of the Second World War, we were still using a lot of horse-drawn things in the Second World War. So 1920, it's a different time than it is now. So for the post office, designing and producing stamps, when you've got very short period of time to come up with some new stamps, you're going to see simpler designs. You're going to see overprints. As suddenly a bunch of stamps they can't use up anymore, they're going to overprint them and use them for a different value. Delivering the stamps, like I assume they're all printed in one place or maybe two. So you've got to deliver all over Germany all these stamps, and it's going to have to be done by train. Quite the undertaking. And then you're going to have to advise all the post offices of the new rates. And then there's going to be the problem of, the new rate is 500 when it used to be 100. And the stamps haven't arrived yet at the faraway post office. They're going to have to figure out a way to have people get the right amount of stamps on a letter. For the public, and this sounds a little silly, but getting the stamps to fit on the envelope, the rates were increasing so fast that using multiple stamps, 1, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100 even stamps on a single envelope to pay the proper rate to when rates are going up was a real problem. And then figuring out the new rates, because you don't have the internet at home to look up the price of the stamp. Now, in Canada, if I want to go buy some stamps, I buy some stamps to mail Christmas cards. If I don't use them all up, I'll use them next year. because the rate will be the same. They're forever stamps. I don't have to worry about the rate. I just go buy the stamp. It's a forever stamp. The rates go up. It doesn't bother me. The other thing Germany does, like many other European countries, is they have many, many postal rates. So there's many, many rates that are being adjusted, not just the rate to mail a letter. And in Canada, we're used to the permanent stamp. That's the only one we use. And there's an international rate and a rate to the U.S., but those are the only two, and you go figure them out when you need them. So, to let ourselves look at what German stamps look like and the rates before this all started, this is the Germania issue, and it's actually a series that started in 1900. So there are many more of these stamps than the ones that I've just shown here. And we remind ourselves in Canada and the U.S. it costs 2 cents to mail a letter. So the Germania issue 1921, 40 pfennigs, 60 pfennigs, and 1 mark 20. And it goes up from 40 to 1 mark, 60 to 3 marks, and 120 to 6 marks. But we see we've got a 40 mark stamp, the red one at the end of the first row. There's a 60 mark stamp. That's the second one in on the left in the middle row. The one that I found was interesting. In the middle row at the end, 1 1/4 marks. Well, the local rate was 1.25 marks, so that's what that stamp is for. And there's a 2 mark and a 4 mark stamp. To get to 1 or 3 or 6, well, for 6 you're going to have to take a 2 and a 4. But with that issue of stamps, we can accommodate pretty much all the rates. And there's a local rate within city, a city-to-city rate from one city to another, and a foreign rate, an international rate. So between May 1921 and August of 1922, we have this issue of stamps with iron workers, miners, and farmers. And we need to pay a little bit of attention here because we're going to see these stamps again overprinted, but sometimes printed in a different color and then overprinted. So rates are now 40, 60, 120. We saw that before, going up to 1, 3, and 6. And there's a 120 stamp, the blue one there, that's the foreign rate. And there's the purple one, a 60 pfennig stamp. It's 120 pfennigs, not 1 mark 20. But these are 105 to 160 pfennigs. And these are, at the time it was called the paper mark, papier mark. Rates start to go up July 1922, 1, 3, and 6. And by December, 6 months later, it's gone up 10 times. 1 to 10, 3 to 25, 6 to 80. And we have the post horns and the number in an oval design. These are not all the post horn stamps. There are 2 or 3 more issues of the post horn stamps are different values. But here we see the 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and 20 values. And we see that in October 22, the foreign rate is 20 marks. And December, 10 marks is the domestic rate. We see the post horns reissued at 5, 10, 20, 30, and 50. And we see that we can't, for instance, if we want the 80 mark foreign rate, we're going to have to get a 50 and a 30 stamp. So we're starting to see that we have to get 2 stamps, not just 1, 2, or 3 stamps to come up with the rate to mail our letter. So in the last 6 months of July 1922, starts to go up a fair bit. So minors, February to May 23, and numbers, March to August 23. And the minor issue, you see, this is similar to the farmer, miners, and iron workers issue, but the rates are now going up, 5, 20, 30, and 50. And you're going to say, gee, the 20 and 30 are used, but the 5 and the 50 are mint. Why is that? And we're going to think about it and say, gee, some of these stamps should be worth a lot of money. we're going to come to a 100,000 mark stamp. Surely that's worth a lot of money. Well, certainly the mint issues are worth 3 to 5 cents on the market. In this particular issue, the 5 mark and the 50 mark stamp are kind of expensive, used, and so I don't have them. I just said, well, I'll spend the 5 cents and I'll get the mint issue, because all I want to do is see the examples of the stamps. But we can see, to come up with an 80 mark rate, 30 and 50, we're going to have to use 2 stamps. 25 marks, 20 and a 5. 20 marks, 50 marks, 150 marks, we're going to have 3 50 mark stamps. March the 1st, 1923, we go to 40, 100, and 300. So now we get into the bottom row, I think, are the beginning of the real hyperinflation stamps. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, and 1,000 marks. And we can see the rates are 120, 300, and 800. Again, 800, we're going to have 2 400s and so on. 120, we're going to have some combination of stamps. The other thing to watch is we're going to see these stamps, again, the bottom row in particular, overprinted. And we're going to see the 1,000 mark stamp overprinted, I think 3 times. But each time it's printed in a different color. And we'll talk about that, and we'll see all of these stamps overprinted and sometimes reprinted in a different color. The last of what I will call the commemorative stamples, the Wartburg Castle and the Cologne Cathedral, May and July of 1923, but in 5,000 and 10,000 mark denominations. It's getting high. So we see by September 1923, foreign rates are now 200,000 marks. So we've gone from 120 marks local rate, and it was at 1 mark, so that's 120 times, to 30,000. That's 30,000 times increase. This is really rather a lot. And we have the number in the oval stamp. We saw 2 of them before at a 5 and a 10 mark value. Now we go from 50 all the way up to 100,000 marks. And this is a stamp I thought, when I looked at it, I said, oh my, I have 100,000. That's got to be worth a lot of money. Mint is worth 5 cents, and used it's worth less than $1. So Germany's a big country. A lot of people mailed letters. You couldn't communicate other than by mailing a letter. That was the primary way of communication. So a lot of people in the country, a lot of people had to pay whatever the price for the stamp was and mail a letter. So a lot of them got used. The 50 through 500 mark denominations were printed October and December of 1922, and the rest were printed through September of 1923. And we can see the rates, 8,000, 20,000, 60,000. So we're going to have a time, even with these stamps, coming up with, and we're going to have to use more than 1 stamp. If we're going to 20,000 marks, we're going to have, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 mark stamps, 4,000 mark stamps. We're going to have some multiple of stamps, getting all the way up to 200,000 marks on September the 1st, 1923. So we're going to have to use 2 of those 100,000 marks stamps to mail a letter. So this is accelerating between July and September, which is really only 2 months, right? July the 1st to September the 1st. Fantastic increase in prices. September of 1923, 3 stamps are issued in thousands. These are the last of what I would call the design stamps till we get till the end of 1923. 550 and 75,000 marks. And you'll say, why is the 75,000 mark stamp mint? Well, because it's worth 3 cents and the used one is worth more. For some reason or other, that stamp didn't get used a lot in the period. Then we get to overprints, August and September of 1923, and the rates are increasing spectacularly. we get to 750,000 marks to mail a letter, 250,000 marks to mail a letter. And the post office is madly overprinting stamps to come up with the values. And we will see the farmer and miner stamps that we had before are being overprinted. You will see the 20 and the 25,000 are the 25 mark farmer stamps. That's not the one I've got displayed. It was a lower value, but there's the 15 and the 20 are also on the farmer. The other thing we see with the 25 farmer value is, well, it's done twice, but the 30 blue was red originally and has been reprinted in blue at 30. And I think that maybe what they're doing is trying to match the blue stamp also overprinted 30. They're trying to keep the stamps the same color if they're overprinted to the same value. We will see the 75,000, that's the 1,000 mark gray stamp. It's now 75,000 overprinted. And I think the 125 mark, it's hard to see, that's also the 1,000 mark gray, and it's been overprinted at 125,000. So we have 100,000 and 125,000. August and September, and we see the rates going up dramatically. And 8,000, well, the 8,000, that would have paid a rate. The 20,000 would have paid a rate. The 25 and the 30 pays a rate. The 75,000 pays a rate. The 100 pays a rate. The 125 is going to be used for something else. Still September and October of 1923, the 250,000 and the 800,000 are in September. And again, we have stamps that are reprinted in different colors. The 250 Carmen was orange, and the last two are one's Carmen and one's rose. The 400,000 are all in olive, and 3 of them were in different colors. And there's the last one, 800,000, was the 1,000 mark, and it's been reprinted in green. So the red and the brown ones were originally red and brown, and we see that the 200 mark red stamp has been overprinted both 250,000 and 800,000. And the 400 brown is also 250 and 800,000. So I'm guessing they had lots extra of the 200 and the 400, and therefore they could overprint them. The other ones, they reprinted in green. Either they were green to begin with, or they reprinted them in green, so all the 800,000 stamps would be green and look alike. We go to millions. October 1923. Here are some overprinted stamps again, and again they've changed some of the colors. The last two were originally orange and green, and they've been reprinted in rose. But the rates are now 100,000 to 4 million, 750,000 to 30 million between September 20th and October 20th in a month. So 100, 800, 2 million, 4 million, 250, 2, 5, 10. Spectacular increases in a month. And again, you're going to have to use these stamps. Well, there's a 2 million rate, but a 6 million rate, you're going to have to use 3 of them. 800,000 we saw before. 250,000 we saw in the previous slide. 5 million and 15 million, how are we going to come up with that? 4 million, 10 million, and 30 million, well, we can come up with those. So there's now a new issue of stamps. And these are, you can see it's all the same design, just printed in a different color. And then the value has been overprinted. So 100 million marks. 1 million, 2 million, 4, 5, 10, all the way up to 500 million marks. And again, isn't a 500 million mark stamp worth a lot of money? A lot of them were printed. The 2 million purple, is a hard one to find used, so there it's mint. So 4 million, 10 million, 30 million to 500 million to a billion to 4 billion. You will notice in German, a million is a million, but it's plural. It's Millionen when it's two. A lot of times European refer to 1 million and 2 millions. They pluralize it. So in German, that's what's done. So it's Millionen. And this is between October the 20th and November the 5th. So that's 15 days. 15 days it goes from 10 million to a billion. Billion is milliard and milliarden. We'll see them in the next slide. So fabulous number of stamps, and this is used for 15 days. Right? 200 million, 100 million, 10 million, 30 million, 40 million. So we now pretty much come to the end, and these are milliarden, milliard or milliarden. And it's kind of the same design as before, but it's overprinted now in different colors. And so the first row there is November the 4th to the 24th. The single stamp that was 100 marks is now overprinted to a billion marks. And then the 6 at the bottom, November the 16th to the 19th, 6 different stamps, 6 different values from that million series, and they've been overprinted in billions. And the difference is they're all overprinted on slightly different values. 10 billion on 100 million, for instance. And rates go from November the 5th to November the 26th, less than a month, 20 days, from 500 million to 40 billion. 320 billion. I can't even understand 320 billion. Or I'm paying 40 billion marks to mail a letter. These are, so it's gone from 1 mark to 40 billion marks. This is astronomical. It's a disaster. How did anyone ever manage to pay 50 billion marks for that second last stamp in the first row? How did they ever come up with that much money? But I guess, wages were going up, prices were going up, everything was going absolutely mad. And we see between November the 20th and the 26th, it's up by 4 times. And where do we get an $80 billion mark stamp? That we'd have to use a whole bunch of them, or 320 billion. Where do we get those stamps from? Now, what actually happened was, on November the 16th, the Rentenmark was introduced. Renten means mortgage. And it was 1 trillion to 1. 1 trillion Papiermarks to 1 Rentenmark. So the 10 billion, 20 billion, 80 billion on November the 20th, on November the 26th, when it goes up by 4 times, what the post office said is, okay, for 4 days, all stamps are valid for 4 times the rate. So if you had bought on November the 20th a 10 billion mark stamp, and I doubt you bought and kept a whole lot in inventory, you could then use that to pay the November the 26th rate of 40 billion. And the 40 billion rate lasted only for 4 days, from November the 26th to December the 1st, or is that 5 days? So they didn't actually have to print 40 billion, 80 billion, and 320 billion mark stamps, because they would just use 1 80 billion, or however many stamps you had to use to come up to 80 billion, and that counted for 320 billion. So you went and bought 120 billion mark stamp, but you paid 80 billion marks for it for 4 days. And I think you really, really, really had to want to mail a letter between November the 26th and December the 1st. Because on December the 1st, the Rentenmark is introduced, and here are the new December the 1st stamps. 5 pfennigs, 5 new pfennigs, mails a local letter, 10 pfennigs, and 30 pfennigs, mails a letter internationally. And here are 3, 5, 10, 20, and 50, and 100 Pfennig new Rentenmark stamps, and these are the ones that were used. This stopped. There was theoretically a mortgage against land that secured the Rentenmark, and it stopped the inflation. They stopped printing money. And for 1 year only after December the 1st, you could use the old stamps, and I think I've got this right, I may be out by a zero, of 50 billion papier marks for 5 new Pfennigs. So you could use up your old stamps if you had any, but after a year they were invalid. Now, as I said, there would be multiples. So here is a 2 and a 2 for a 4. We've got 18 marks. January the 10th, 1923, postmarked Mannheim. 6 marks, January the 1st, 1923, postmarked Sonnenberg. It might have been that the 6 mark and the 18 mark were the rate that you were trying to pay. On January the 15th, 5 days after January the 10th, it goes to 20, 50, and 150. So I don't quite know what 18 marks paid, but it may be that this was part of, these stamps may all have been on a single letter, and somebody soaked them off, and they probably now wish they hadn't, because they would have been much more interesting left on the cover. Same thing happens with the 1,000 mark values, and so 2 4,000 mark stamps add up to 8. Now, that's the August 24th to September the 1st rate, but I'm just speculating. I can't read the postmark. I'm just speculating that that was used on a single letter. Again, all of these stamps could have been used on a letter to make up the rate because they were going up so fast. And it may be when you went to the post office that they didn't get the new supply of stamps, so they had to give you a whole bunch of stamps to put on your letter, to mail your letter. But multiples galore. And it gets even worse. Here's a 20 million mark stamp, and there are 4 of them, so that's 80 million marks. The November the 1st rate was 40 million marks. I don't know. We got 25 million marks. We've got 8 million marks twice. Various times of cancellation, but just it was spectacular. And covers, if you can look up on eBay or something like that to see covers, there are some fascinating covers with fascinating groups and numbers of stamps on them. So as I say, it ended December 1923. 1 Rentenmark was 1,000 billion Weimar paper marks, and postal rates went back to 10 Rentenmarks. So thanks for listening.